Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Just going to give you a minute or two to get everyone into the room, and then we'll get started, inshallah. Right. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Good evening, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. May peace be upon you. This is Edward Ahmed Mitchell. I'm the Deputy Director of CAIR, the Council on American Islamic Relations. It's my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's webinar. As you all know, we're gathered here to discuss your rights. What are your rights when you are confronted with immigration law enforcement at your school in particular? That's what we want to discuss tonight. We've been holding multiple webinars at CAIR over the past several weeks related to President Trump's executive orders. This webinar is very unique. It's focused on his orders related to ICE, Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, specifically what impact that might have on private schools, particularly Islamic private schools, teachers, principals, parents, board members. So we're very happy to do this in partnership with our friends at ISLA. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Shazza Khan now to introduce ISLA and talk a bit about why they felt this event was so important.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. I see many of our Islamic school leaders and board members here joining us at this CAIR and ISLA webinar. We're really grateful to our partners at CAIR for taking the opportunity to inform our community about their rights, in particular related to the latest executive orders. As you all know, Islamic schools are rapidly expanding around the United States. There's upwards of 350 to 450 full-time Islamic schools in the US that serve up to 100,000 Muslim students. But Islamic schools are more than just the students that they serve. It also includes many different generations of people, including the staff, including the parents and caregiver communities. So it's a complex institution that serves multiple generations. But most importantly, what makes Islamic schools unique and why we asked CAIR to provide this specific webinar for Islamic schools is because our schools serve minors and they are entrusted to us without their parents there. And so we want to be sure that we know how to protect our children and our families that are related to our schools. Islamic schools are also come in all different shapes and sizes. They're in all different kinds of communities across the United States. While some Islamic schools are located in one school building that looks just like any other school that you might have gone to or seen in the neighborhood, others are co-located with a masjid. Some have modulars like portables that are outside of the school building. And so there's a number of different issues that come into play when we think about our Islamic schools that I'm sure so many of you who've joined us today are thinking about in relation to your specific school. We've partnered with CAIR again to host this webinar so that you can learn more about these executive orders, in particular those pertaining to ICE, which has now been allowed to come onto school campuses. After hearing from the legal team at CAIR, you'll also be hearing from Sister Rasha Al-Haggan, who is a private school administrator, also a previous founding head of an Islamic school, and a board member of the ISLA. So we look forward to providing you with more information, and we invite you to ask whatever questions you have using the Q&A so that you can have that addressed during this really important and unique seminar.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Khan, for that. And I didn't introduce you properly. So for those who don't know, Dr. Khan is the executive director of ISLA, the Islamic Schools League of America. And that's a nonprofit that supports full-time Islamic schools across the whole country. They do research and provide other resources and professional development to Islamic schools. And as a board member of a private Islamic school that just started, I'm going to be looking to get some insight from you all as we are growing, inshallah. So thank you, Dr. Khan, for all your work, and may Allah reward ISLA for all of your work. We're also going to hear, as she mentioned earlier, from Sister Rasha Al-Hagan and some other people. But first, we're just going to start with our Government Affairs Director, Robert McCaw. I'm going to bring him on, and he's going to be talking to you about the substance of President Trump's executive orders related to ICE. And really, I should say, Robert, you'll correct me here, the Department of Homeland Security's orders related to ICE, and then also some executive orders related to immigration enforcement. And so
Yes.
again, there are literally hundreds of orders that he's issued, but these ones we're going to talk about tonight relate to immigration enforcement, sensitive places like houses of worship and schools, etc. And so Robert's going to take it away, and Dr. Khan and I will stay on, and we might jump in occasionally. But Robert McCaw, floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to be sharing my screen. 1 minute. There we go. Start this all from the beginning. So again, assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Robert McComb, CAIR's National Government Affairs Director. I'm really pleased to present you this time-sensitive briefing on the executive orders, directives, memorandums that the Trump administration and the federal agencies have been pumping out for the last several weeks since Trump has taken office. What I'm going to be doing is going over the different executive orders that will be impacting our community. I'll be broadly talking about some and zeroing in on others, but hopefully you'll have a better understanding of what these orders are, and also which specific orders are really also targeting the Muslim community. Now, just to clarify for everyone, an executive order is a presidential directive managing the federal operations of agencies that he has control over. So when he gives an order to DHS to, carry out certain activities, they do that. And so when Trump took office, he implemented over 100 executive orders. One of the first orders was declaring a national emergency at the southern border. And then after that, there's been a series of directives that have also taken place through the agencies I'm going to get to. Now, executive order has the force of law, but it is not a law. It can be abridged by laws passed by Congress, and it can also, it can't counter any law that's been passed by Congress, and it can overturn previous orders from previous administrations. There are some executive orders that are still in existence after 100 years. A lot of them have to do with wildlife conservation, but they're on the books. And so I just want to give you a background on what an executive order is. And so, in addition to Trump declaring executive order that has a national emergency at the southern border, where he's now sending troops and has ordered DHS and ICE to remove undocumented individuals, he's also passed several executive orders that are targeting specifically the Muslim community. And when you combine these later with these directives about ICE, that's why you're going to see there's some concern from CAIR in the Muslim community and Palestinian Americans as well. So one of the first executive orders the president signed was the executive order on protecting against foreign terrorism. It has a legal basis in the Immigration Nationalization Act, and it enhances the vetting and screening standards of all foreign nationals coming into the United States or already in the United States. And that's actually a bigger expansion than the previous Muslim ban executive order, and also lays the groundwork for a future Muslim ban or expanded ban. This order is very vague. It calls for the prevention of entry of individuals that have hateful ideologies or support sectarian violence, and it really lacks clear definitions for all these ambiguous terms. And what it does is it opens the door for subjective and potentially discriminating visa vetting. Now, in addition to that, the order would require the Department of Homeland Security, Department of Justice, State Department, other intelligence agencies that actually create a list of countries that have deficient vetting standards. And it required a 60-day report that is going to come to the president now in about 45 days, where they will be listing countries that will possibly be on a new travel ban. And the issue with that is this order actually goes beyond just preventing nationals coming into the United States. It impacts those coming in, those already there. It affects all aliens, which include legal permanent residents, people here on student visas, people here on work visas. So it's not just potential immigrants, but it's also current non-citizen residents. And the other concern that we have is this order instructs the Department of Justice to further scrutinize individuals that are aliens here in the United States from these potentially listed countries that would end up on that travel ban. And so that is a serious concern to CAIR, and it's something we're really monitoring. But again, the terms are very vague. There's also a new executive order on combating anti-Semitism, and it essentially it threatens to deport student visa holders or resident aliens who participated in the order says pro-jihadist, but what they are really referring to is pro-Palestinian human rights protests. Now, the issue with that order is that it's overbroad. It's, we believe, unenforceable, and it's dishonest because it is citing authorities that would prevent the entry of individuals or the deportation of individuals that have provided material support or support terrorist organizations. And we know that just attending a pro-Palestinian human rights rally does not qualify for that. That doesn't mean the administration might not go after people, but we think it could be challengeable. And so, these are our concerns as well. And again, you cannot equate attending student protests with terrorism. In addition to that, and this is part of what we're now discussing, DHS, Department of Homeland Security, which oversees ICE and Customs and Border Protection, they have rescinded previous protections for sensitive areas where immigration enforcement could happen. So prior, under the Obama administration, under the even Trump and Biden administrations, ICE would not go into schools, houses of worship, hospitals, rallies, other public events. And the directive issued by DHS says that they're going after criminal aliens. But, I strike the word may from this presentation because they have gone after undocumented individuals more broadly. There was just a report yesterday of ICE trying to enter a public school. They do have some laws protecting undocumented persons in that state. I think it was in Chicago. And the school administration blocked the police coming in. They called the school attorney, and ICE actually left the premise. But it's a serious concern to CAIR. And so, our concerns about this new directive are it would permit arrests or at least detaining people from sensitive locations like schools or mosques. This undermines community trust. It impacts civil rights because there are now concerns that ICE might try to do enforcement actions at lawful protests, that they could attend student protests. And also the directive allows for a case-by-case parole decisions and enforcement. And so while DHS is claiming this is only geared towards undocumented persons with a criminal record, really it gives new broader powers to arrest people in these sensitive areas and spaces. And also because of the declared national emergency and now this new memorandum, there's the concern that they're first starting with people with warrants, but they're going to more broadly apply this over time. And then finally, breaking today, the Department of Justice launched a joint task force on October 7th. And part of its directive is calling on the FBI and Department of Justice and law enforcement agencies to prosecute supporters of terrorism on college campus. It uses very ambiguous language, and also prosecute individuals that would be funding terrorism. And what we know from this is that again, supporting pro-Palestinian human rights protests do not equate with breaking the law. And while that memo does not create any new laws, it's just an expressed sentiment from the Department of Justice on how they might start changing their operations. So we're continuing to monitor these changes. Now, that's a lot of information, but from this point, I'm actually going to hand it over to my colleague, our attorney at CAIR, Gadir Abbas, and he's going to cover some of these, basic know your rights, programs and advice that CAIR is offering. So Gadir, please, take it away.
Yes.
And just tell me when you want me to go to the next slide.
Yeah, sounds good. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Thanks for
Alaikum
joining.
assalam.
So one of the important things to understand if you're dealing with ICE or any other law enforcement is that as an Islamic school, as a private school, your property, your building is your own. Even if you're co-located with a masjid, you still get to decide who comes in and who doesn't come in, even if you have like an open masala type of policy. And so if law enforcement comes to the masjid, if they come to the Islamic school, if they don't have a warrant, you can not let them in. That's a really important thing to standardize across the institution is if somebody is approached by law enforcement and they ask to come into the premises, say no, unless they have a warrant. If they have a valid warrant, they're not going to even ask you to come in. They're just going to come in with their warrant. And so it's not the case that you need to, if you get approached by law enforcement while you're at school, that you need to do a legal analysis of the sufficiency of the arrest warrant. No, you don't need to. If they claim to have an arrest warrant and give you something that looks like an arrest warrant, they're going to just come in with or without your permission. They're not going to wait for your permission. And so what you want to do as an institution is you want to make sure that all the teachers, all the school leaders, all the board members, anybody who has an official role at the institution should know if they're approached by law enforcement on campus that, one, don't let them in the building if they don't have a warrant. So if they don't have a warrant, you just get their information and say, I'll have a lawyer contact you. You could have me, you could have anybody at CAIR, you could reach out to another lawyer. Our price is right. We do this for free, but you're more than welcome to reach out to another lawyer. But it's an important step. If there's not a warrant, don't let them in. That's the teacher doesn't let them in. The janitor doesn't let them in. The principal doesn't let them in. The imam doesn't let them in. The board member doesn't let them in. If there's a warrant, again, they're not going to ask you. They're just going to come in. And your job as an institution is to train your staff to get that warrant, that piece of paper, into the institution's governing body's hands. And so you take the warrant, maybe it's if they let you keep your phone, you take some pictures of it, you send it to the board sends it to a lawyer, and the lawyer reviews it, reaches out to law enforcement. But during a search, there's not much you can do besides stay silent, right? The only thing you can really do is stay silent. There's basically no situation where the government can compel you to answer questions against your will. There are some exceptions. There's some unique situations where they can, but it definitely is the case that if law enforcement shows up to your private property, they cannot in any way make you answer any questions, and you shouldn't answer any questions at all to them. Maybe besides, what your name is and if you have some kind of official role with the masjid, because that goes to establish your authority to exclude them from the premises. And so now we're at step 3, where the law enforcement came to you. If they don't have a warrant, you just don't let them in. That's easy. Okay, get their contact information. Blame me. Blame lawyers. Right? A lawyer told us. The institution's leadership told us not to forward any contacts to law enforcement to a lawyer. I'll have that lawyer contact you, and that's it. Even if the agent says, which they often do, you know what? If you don't have anything to hide, you wouldn't be getting a lawyer involved. If you don't have anything to hide, you would be answering my questions. If anybody hears that information, you especially need to exercise your rights in relation to that agent. That agent isn't acting professionally if he's telling you or she's telling you that you don't need a lawyer. In fact, you do need a lawyer, and any good professional FBI agent would understand that. All right, if we go two slides over past that one. Okay. So so there's nothing you can do if ICE or anybody else is gonna raid your institution with a search warrant. There's nothing you can do ahead of time to stop that, other than be a good institution with good governance practices and all that. But you do want to develop protocols for how your staff and your institution deals with any contact with law enforcement. And let me tell you why that's particularly important. Sometimes institutions, if they're contacted by law enforcement, or maybe like a leader, or like it's a board member, it's something, they'll try to avoid the perception of embarrassment that might accompany being contacted by law enforcement, or the trying to avoid or tamp down any fear that if everybody at the institution knew that they were contacted by law enforcement might arrive. And I'll say that the best way to dispel the fear is to handle any contact with law enforcement extremely transparently. Whoever's contacted by law enforcement, in person, by email and writing, over the phone, at the grocery store, at home, wherever, if they have an affiliation with the Islamic school, with the masjid, they're on the board, they're a teacher, they need to tell the institution that they've been contacted by law enforcement. And they need to, all staff, all people with official positions need to commit to, if they're contacted by law enforcement, whether it's while they're at school or whether it's while they're at the grocery store about the school, they're going to let people know that this happened. And the standard protocol is going to involve declining to answer questions and referring the matter to an outside lawyer to be the intermediary between the institution and law enforcement. You can have like a basic protocol where you say, like, anybody contacted by law enforcement sends this email, anybody that's on the receiving end of a warrant, their first task is to get a copy of the warrant to everybody, But people need reminders, especially in this climate. They need reminders. It might feel like too much to rely on a presentation or like a staff memo that you sent 6 months ago, 8 months ago. And so you want to find a way to revisit these things and to remind your staff about how to go about responding in the appropriate institutionally required way. And that gets to designating a legal, a lawyer that the board is going to work with to reach out to the law enforcement that contacted. That can be us, that can be anybody you'd like. Maybe there's a lawyer on the board already or a lawyer in the community, alhamdulillah, that's helping you out. And that last part, communicate proactively, it's just, in my experience, it is the case that like a law enforcement visit to an Islamic institution can cause a lot of consternation. I think the best solution to that consternation is to communicate proactively. It really is to tell people, to give people information and knowledge about what's happening, rather than try to manage the situation off in a corner by yourself. Could we go to the next slide? Let's see, is there, the slide's a little mushed. Is that how?
Sorry, it was just more pointing to the fact that we have developed a new Know Your Rights slide on what to do when engaging with ICE. It basically, it covers these, main parts of remaining silent, demanding proof, demanding a warrant, of course, knowing what's the difference between a judicial warrant and an ICE warrant, documenting the encounter, documenting anyone taken, immediately contacting your legal counsel, and a whole host of other good protocol, that you would want to adopt at your institution.
Yeah, and it's not rocket science. But it is very difficult. there's a lot of people that are, when they're confronted with a law enforcement official, a police officer, or any kind of person with official authority, they're gonna, the tendency is to just defer to whatever that authority is saying. And so if you don't have, if the school doesn't have like something affirmative to give people to do, they're going to default into this deferential mode, and follow the lead of the people that have guns, that have showed up at the house of worship or the Islamic school. And all of this is to say that so far, we haven't seen, there's been reports of raids at schools, and I think it's so far they don't seem inclined to do the raids at schools, or they don't seem inclined to do the raids at houses of worship. That could obviously change. But the way as an institution, you deal with that is, one, an employer, like a employer subject to the state, federal laws, you're going to have to do employment authorization verification. That's like the I-9 that everybody fills out for an employer when they start. That's like one step, is just make sure those records are really, really good and kept well. Because, if I had to guess, there is this enforcement mechanism they have with I-9s. They can come in and say, we want to look at all of your I-9s, all of your employment verification authorization forms that you've collected for your folks. And if you have that, great. If you have all those documents, great. You're going to be able to show them, you know where they are already. They're in the filing cabinet with all the important stuff. If you don't have that already, that's something you want to work towards. You want to work towards really strong compliance measures, so that when, as an Islamic institution, you might be subject to some unfair scrutiny, some disproportionate attention from law enforcement, you're able to withstand it because your governance is strong, your compliance is excellent. And to the extent that something unexpected happens, you just got to have enough training, signs, in key places that maybe direct people to what the protocol is. If somebody comes to the masjid, somebody comes to the Islamic school, do not let them in if they're law enforcement and they're without a warrant. If they're with a warrant, you still don't answer their questions because you don't have to. Yeah. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Gadir. Thank you so much. If we could bring on Gadir and Robert at the same time. We got so there have been several questions in the Q&A. I've answered a few of them. One question was, is it possible to show a sample warrant so people can see what's the difference between an ICE warrant and a judicial warrant? I think I have one here. Let me see if I can pull it up. And
I was actually, if you don't find it, I will find it.
Okay, I found it, Robert. It's okay. Okay. All right, you all should be able to see my screen. Can you all see the screen? All right, so our friends over at Project South created this little sample here to show you the difference between the two. So on the left here, well, the left, depending on what side of the screen you're. So the one that says in the upper left-hand corner, Department of Homeland Security, that is the ICE warrant. Okay, that would authorize them to, arrest an individual who's here illegally. It doesn't authorize them to come into your private area without permission. On the other side, the one that says Project South at the top, that is a judicial search warrant. That does authorize them to enter the premises that are noted on the document. So if they have a judicial search warrant to enter your house, your mosque, your school, whatever, you are going to have to let them inside if they have that judicial warrant. But the other warrant is just to grab the person, not to enter a place. Gadir, is that correct? This all look correct to you?
Yeah. So the ICE, they can't come in if they show up with an ICE warrant, let's say, and it's for like a community member, that, it's like you're Islamic school, you're co-located at a masjid. This brother comes to pray dhuhr at the masjid every day, and the police and the ICE figures that out. they show up with the administrative warrant that does not give them permission to enter the facility if you deny them that permission. But if it's from a court, they're not going to ask for your permission. They're just going to come in. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. All right, so with that now, we're going to bring on Sister Russia El-Hagan, who is going to speak to us more about some of these issues and really speak to some of the thought process that Islamic private schools have already been going through, including in ISLA, about how to address some of these and other related issues. So, Sister Russia, we'll turn over to you, and then we'll take any live questions to the audience that people would like to pose, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum. Jazakallah khairan for being here and taking part in this webinar. Can you guys see my screen?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm just going to talk for a few minutes, kind of taking what Brother Gadir put out there and just kind of contextualizing it from an Islamic school perspective on how you could prepare your school community in addressing any kind of issues with law enforcement on your campuses. One of the things that you want to really take into consideration, and really these slides are more of questions and things to consider. And of course, we have a lot of tawakkul on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but we also have to kind of tie our camel. And so planning ahead is really, really, really important when it comes to something like this before you actually have a crisis that you have to address. So one of the things that ISLA has talked about either at our retreats or at our PD time or even on our website is that every school should have a crisis management plan. So this would be the time for you to review your school's crisis management plan. Typically, your school's crisis management plan will include things like safety protocol, securing your campus, what to do in case of a fire, all inclement weather, or if someone on staff has like some kind of emergency health event. That's kind of most of the crisis management plan. But this could also be something that you use your crisis management plan to address what to do if you have ICE or law enforcement or any really law enforcement coming to your campus. So you want to review this plan. And as you're reviewing it, as Shaza said in the very beginning, we know that Islamic schools come in all sizes and shapes. You want to consider that when you're thinking about your audience. Are you a preschool? Are you a high school? The number of students, your community, who are the stakeholders? Do you have counselors? Do you have learning specialists? Are you, or do you just have teachers and students? Like, what are you, more of a co-op? So you want to take into consideration your school audience and the stakeholders when you're within your school, when you're reviewing your school crisis management plan. You also want to consider your buildings and your resources. So, we have schools that are many buildings. We have schools that are one building. We have schools that are within mosques. So you want to make sure you consider all of these things ahead of time. And when you're in the middle of a crisis, you don't really think about all these things. So that's why we want you to review your school's crisis management plan. When you're thinking about what to do, creating and communicating your guidelines is really, really important. And as Brother Gadir talked about, communication. So you want to consider when you're creating your guidelines, what are the guidelines you're going to give to faculty? What about administrators? What about senior administrators in case your school has middle level leaders, but also senior level leaders? Does your school have security? How will you create guidelines considering that or not considering that because your school may not have that? And how will you communicate all of that to all stakeholders, including deciding whether you need to communicate anything to students and families? Some of the things that you might want to think about when you are considering if law enforcement specifically comes on campus is thinking about, how will you guide your teachers? I'll give you guys an example of one school. And this is what this school has decided to do because this is what works for this school. And remember, what works for one school may not work for another school. They in this school decided that they instructed their teachers that if they see their school that have multiple buildings with fields and things like that, so they've decided that they will that they've asked their teachers, we don't want teachers to kind of get you know, to have to get in any kind of conversations with law enforcement. So they've said to teachers, if somebody comes on our campus and you guide them to the welcome, the lobby, they sit down and you go grab administrators. Any member of the senior administration team, you grab them. And then of those senior administrative team, there's three: the head of school, the assistant head of school, and the business manager are the three that have been trained on what exactly to do and deal with ICE. And so those are the three people. You grab any member of the senior admin team, and then that admin team will get those three people or one of those three people, and then those three people have been trained on what to do. For example, they will call the lawyer, and the lawyer will talk directly to ICE. Or another school has decided that they will talk directly to ICE and say that you can't come on campus, or they will examine the warrant. So you want to think about what your school is going to do ahead of time and think through all of those decisions. So when you're thinking about this, you want to think about what instructions will you give your teachers? What instructions will you give your administrators? How will you communicate this plan to teachers, to administrators, to faculty? How will you train your admin who will deal directly with law enforcement? Let's say not all your admin will, or maybe all your admin will. How will they be trained to deal with law enforcement? So these are just some key considerations for law enforcement on campus. When you're thinking about, we know that the schools are ultimately there to serve and support students. These are minors, K through 12th grade. Some of them are preschool. And you might have some families and some students in your schools that are already dealing with this idea of deportations, whether it's family members or people they know in their community. And so you want to think about not just how you prepare your school to address when law enforcement comes on campus, but also like, what do you do and how do you support, how's your school going to support, from a trauma-informed perspective, students that are dealing with deportations? So here are some questions that we want you to consider. What should teachers and administrators do once they are aware of students who are being affected? Are they talking directly to those students? Are they reaching out to family? Is there only one person that's going to be doing that? You want to think about these things. If you have counseling services, how will those counselors support students? If you don't, are you instructing families or children to reach out to a trusted adult in the school community? What protocols does your school have for informing a student's teachers? So I know in one case, the school found out that a family was going through or dealing with a deportation issue, and the family specifically asked for teachers not to know. Maybe a family does want their teachers to know. How will that be communicated? Are you going to be sending an email? Are you going to be talking to the teachers? All of those things. Does your school have like an advisory or an advisor that has a good relationship with students? So you want to think about that, or you want to think about who's going to be talking to the teachers of those students, and how will the school communicate back with family? Sometimes schools will decide that we have these services and we have the support. The family might need a meal, like what is it called, a meal train, whatever supports the school might do. How will that be communicated with the family so that the family can feel supported? Again, if the school can do that. And then finally, what instructions do teachers need in dealing with any trauma that the students might have? Some families or some students cannot have somebody just remind them of this all the time. And so you want to give your teachers some consideration, some things to consider as far as how they support students in the classroom. So these are just some key considerations. Whatever you decide to do, it's really, really important that you communicate. Take into consideration your community, your context, your audience, and communicate to all stakeholders. And ultimately, inshallah, don't forget to make dua. So I will stop here.
Thank you, Rasha. Excellent. Thank you for that. And I think that was very valuable to add to this conversation, especially your firsthand knowledge and ISLA's firsthand experience. So with that, let's bring on Gadir and Robert and Dr. Khan. Let's bring the whole team on together, and we'll see if there are any questions that anyone would like to answer live. I see one question here is ISLA's version of the crisis management plan template available online? That's one question there. We've got some answer questions, but I'll go ahead and repeat them in case anyone wants to answer them verbally. Who do we report to if ICE was unprofessional with administrators or teachers? Gadir, you want to take that one?
Yeah, it's gonna feel, if like ICE comes to your school, it's gonna feel unprofessional because they're doing something violent. They're coming to your building without your permission, right? That's feels violent. It also feels very violating. We've certainly represented individuals who've had their homes raided, or institutions that have had contact, and it feels very violating to have law enforcement come in and go through wherever they want to go through, or what have you. And so it's they're gonna act unprofessionally probably, and it's gonna, even if they act professionally, it's gonna feel extremely violating. And so, rather than, like the things that the kind of the guardrails of what they can and can't do in a situation where they have a warrant are defined by the Constitution, which really doesn't give you a lot of protections. It does, however, you cannot say it, you can remain silent. And I think that's really like the one of the most important things to do if you end up encountering law enforcement is don't take them to the filing cabinet with all the student files. If they have a warrant, they find it or they don't find it. You don't have to help them at all. If it's locked, maybe they can't get into it. Like, that's, and we've talked to some Masajid about that. You can have a policy where you don't nobody unlocks anything for them. That's like very difficult to kind of commit to. But if there's a locked door or a locked cabinet, and they're looking for somebody, not something, they don't have to look through the cabinet. And so yeah, and certainly if you have a law enforcement encounter, the kind of way to address it is bespoke. It's artisanal. You would have, lawyers, you'd call us or call somebody else and you tell the lawyer everything that happened to kind of assess what the best way forward is. If, for example, it's like a fake warrant executed by, charlatans, maybe that's like a lawsuit and public relations where you're really pushing back against them with all available tools. I think that would be the kind of, on one end, like an extreme end, if there's like really kind of clear they've exceeded what they're allowed to do or what their rules allow them to do. That's one end, lawsuit and public relations. And on the other end, maybe it's like a letter, if they do something that is like, galling, but maybe not within their authority. So you should after it happens, part of the protocols should be to consult with a lawyer, and in consultation with that lawyer, if there's something that they did illegal or unprofessional, anywhere from a letter to a lawsuit and a press conference, I think is a possible response.
I would just add to that, you don't have to unlock electronic devices. You don't have to help them in, any way, like Gadir said. And if for some reason they detain you, you can just ask them, am I being detained? And they have to tell you, otherwise they have to let you go. And if they don't, please tell your attorney that. There's also, if this happens, Gadir said, you might not be able to take them to the court, but you can take them to the court of public opinion. So you can definitely have a press conference on this. You can also reach out to your elected officials, mayor, city council, school board, to push back on this. And if they actually did do something that is a violation, in addition to, speaking with your attorney about that, we can always file a complaint to the Department of Homeland Security's Civil Rights and Liberties Office. I'm not sure how it would be run under this administration, but, we document everything, and, we create that paper trail.
I want to add on to some of what you guys, it sparked a thought in my mind. So it's a little tangential, but important. You guys have spoken to what people should do if somebody is if there's an authority, somebody presenting themselves as an authority at the school. I want to talk also just briefly about how we in our Islamic schools should be talking to each other and about each other. And this is just, it's a reminder for all of us, right? That we should be thoughtful and careful about what we are sharing about our students, about each other, about our families. This is part of our deen. And in this moment, we really realize how important it is. So if you know somebody's uncle or ammo is khala, nephew is undocumented, probably not a good idea to be talking about that with anyone else or to be speculating or to be sharing that kind of information. Um, and I want to be really mindful of the enormous weight that our dear administrators and teachers and educators carry. I don't want you walking away from this webinar feeling anxious and scared. We want you to feel prepared. We want you to feel like you have partners, and that's us at ISLA, and that's CAIR, and that's our community, inshallah. So don't feel that way, but let us remind each other of what we can do to protect ourselves from by following what Allah has commanded and the example of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, by not being speculative about anyone and sharing information that's not for anyone else to really be hearing. Um, and I'll say this and also add on, I was speaking to a lawyer in our community here in Austin, Texas, who's giving a webinar on this topic too at this time. And she was saying, she's speaking about college campuses and where there are students saying that there are people who we're not familiar with who are asking about so-and-so and this and that. And so this concept, it's not the first time that we've seen people come into our communities and, you know, act as though they're part of it and try and get information about others by playing that part. So if we follow these commands of our deen and are mindful of what we share about others, I think that can also be very beneficial. I did want to say, as somebody put it in the chat, thank you so much. Our link to the crisis response toolkit is there. It's available for you all to access. A lot of different materials, not this stuff related to ICE, but inshallah, we'll be sharing the recording. And we want to encourage all of our Islamic schools to use this webinar as training. Take advantage. You don't have to regurgitate everything. Use this webinar, have it part of one of your mandatory PD days, or add it in as something that they can do offline, and let this be one of the ways, as Brother Kadir was mentioning, train, remind. I love the point that you made about if we don't train and we don't do it repeatedly, we default to being differential. And I think especially as educators, we might be a little more inclined to this as well. So.
All right, I see a few other questions in the chat. Maybe Robert, here, take a look at that, see if there's anything you all want to answer live or in writing.
Yeah, there's one question about someone's files are purely digital, so no filing cabinets, no locks. If a staff member refuses to give them access, would they be in trouble? No.
No, they would not be in trouble.
fact,
So you do
yeah,
not
they would
have
not.
to, you do not have to give anybody access. Like, you don't have to do anything, right? Like, if they have a warrant, you can just, you'll be kind of
Get out of the way.
Put
It's on
in
them.
a room, and you'll have to sit there, maybe they let you go, but you don't have to help them, do the search. And it does feel like it's like a tough thing to commit to, but you shouldn't help them with the search.
No.
For example, if there's like ambiguity about like, is the warrant good or is the warrant bad? You know what they'll do if you try to push back? They'll say, well, we don't even need a warrant because we had their permission. We yelled and screamed at this person and that person, and they just got out of the way, or they opened the door for us, or they unlocked this or that, whether it's a computer or it's a closet or a filing cabinet. The act of unlocking would be, if there's a dispute about the lawfulness, would be the basis of an argument that you consented to the search. And so that's why you're definitely not going to get in trouble, even though when in the moment it's going to feel like you're going to get in trouble. Okay, absolutely will, because what is the most common thing that we hear law enforcement agents say when people refuse to unlock their devices? This happens a lot at the border. We advise Muslim travelers all the time: don't unlock your device at the border. What does CBP say? Say, well, if you had nothing to hide, then you would let me look at your phone. It's very tricky, but it's almost all, it's like there's like risk a little bit both ways, but I think overwhelmingly there's much more risk in giving them access. And basically what that does is they're gonna look through the stuff, and if you're like a law enforcement agent that decided to raid an Islamic school, you're probably not the nicest person in the world. And so you're gonna take some, WhatsApp image that no one's ever seen before in a group of 2,000 people, and they're gonna say, oh my gosh, this guy's a Hezbollah operative, or this guy's whatever it is, And so you want to kind of steel yourself and your staff and your leadership to just, no, we're not going to unlock that door. We're not going to unlock this device. Good luck. Yeah.
Can I,
And-
can
and
I just add to that
Yeah.
one thing? I will say that just from an administrator who's had to communicate to a large number of people, it depends again on your school size. The more people you have to communicate to and train, the less likely those people are going to remember all the rules. And so I would highly, highly recommend, considering your audience and considering your school community, that you give the least amount of instructions, like the simplest instructions, to the majority of your people, and train 3 or 4 members of your community who will actually deal directly with ICE, and then tell everybody, this is what you do. And then for these 3 people, all of the wonderful things that Brother Gader and Brother Robert and Brother Edward are sharing with us are important. And when you're in a crisis, you're gonna forget, and then you're gonna you're gonna go with like your instinct. And so the one thing I would recommend is to say to teachers, here's what you do. It's 1 or 2 steps. And then it's 3 or 4 administrators that are then going to think about, is there like, I'm yes or no, I'm not gonna, and you don't want to put, also knowing that our teachers are, it's really hard to hire teachers for Islamic schools. You don't want to put this pressure on them to have to deal with all of this. Make it very simple and try to protect them as much as possible, and just assign 2 or 3 people in your community to be the ones to deal with all of these details. That would be my recommendation.
Thank you.
Another interesting question here. Oh, sorry, Robert, you want to cover?
I was just going to read it for you, but hit it.
All right, so the one I'm going to now is, would it be beneficial to build relationships with local police departments in case someone comes on your property pretending to be, an immigration officer and things like that? So I'll just briefly, comment here that I think for masajid, for private schools, it is good to have an open, positive relation with local law enforcement, just for security, right? I mean, they're putting aside the immigration issue. There's always that risk or danger of some nut coming to your school, your house, or to do something crazy. So to have a positive, open line of communication with local law enforcement, I think is always a good thing, especially if your local law enforcement agency is friendly and not run by, a crazy person. Now that's different than federal law enforcement. Federal law enforcement is not who you'd call on to be your first line of defense from, a mass shooter or something like that. So it's a completely different conversation when it comes to that. But I certainly think, just as a general matter, it's good to have that open line of communication with your local law enforcement agencies. And certainly if you're ever approached by someone you think is impersonating a police officer, then 911 is the number to call. Or if you have a direct line of communication with someone else in the department, you can do that. But also you want to make sure, and I think Adir and Robert could speak to this, that you're not putting people in your community in a vulnerable position where they can be easily subject to lawless investigations or entrapment, things like that. So I'll let Gadir and Robert kind of speak more to how to balance those two things.
Yeah, I would, and I volunteer at my local Sunday and Saturday Islamic school. Thankfully, the FBI haven't knocked on the doors. We are aware of our local police to call them. There's always a school police liaison, usually with every department. It's good to know them. You can even have them come out to give you a safety briefing on what your safety and security vulnerabilities might be. So having those types of relationships are good. Always those scrutinize your relations. There are a number of federal grants through countering violent extremism programs. Sometimes police departments will ask if you want to get involved in certain community engagement programs, and you just want to make sure, you know, what is the source of the funding of those programs and what are the purpose of those programs. But generally, Edward's 100% right on it, where you should be at least, you know, engaged with those school safety liaison partners, or, you know, anyone who's in charge of just making sure, you know, that beat cop in your area, that you know who they are. Kadir?
Sorry,
No,
just
you
good to
guys
hear you.
got it. Nothing
Andy?
further. Nothing further. You guys got it.
All right.
Okay, I'm doing good. All right, I see a few more questions here. Let's see. Would ICE agents ever demand access to students? Peter, you want to take that one?
Remains to be seen.
It's, you know, so far we haven't heard, you know, heard or seen that in kind of any like community. There was a few reports in Chicago of ICE coming to school, but it turned out to be not ICE, it was Secret Service, and it was, you know, it's unclear exactly what they were doing there, but they weren't trying to deport people. It looks like, and so I think it's low. I think, you know, it's possible. Anything is possible. But I would say that the risk of ICE executing a warrant in a school against a student is low. I would say that that's, you know, very low kind of thing. Doesn't mean it's like impossible, but I think more likely I would say like a greater risk would be the Islamic schools co-located with a masjid, where you have people coming in and coming out. That's more of like an attractive ICE kind of target, where people are coming and going. But I think in a school, you know, you know, I'm not, of course, like this is terrible what the administration is doing, but if you were an ICE agent and you could, you know, decide, okay, I'm going to get this person while they're inside a building with 200 other people, in like, you know, a labyrinth of halls and rooms, or I'm going to get this person, you know, at their home or while they're walking outside. You can see how, like, even if you're like thinking it from ICE perspective, one is more attractive of a target than another. And so I think that's like, to Rush's point about, like, you don't want to cause alarm in the staff, because it's like a trade-off. Like there is you know, if you cause alarm in the staff, you're experiencing the downside immediately. And of course, you know, sometimes you have to embrace the downside because you're dealing with a risk. But I think that Russia's suggestion of just, you know, put it on a few people to do, you know, A through Z, you know, for everybody else, you know, give them one thing, two things to bring it to the attention of the folks that are going to deal with law enforcement. Yeah.
There was one more question, and they said, if ICE has a judicial warrant, can they take all the devices from the school? Can they interrupt a classroom while in session and question students? And generally, Gadir, ICE warrants, though, they're specifically looking, or judicial warrants, they're specifically looking for certain people. They're not raiding the whole school to look at every single person in the school like a factory. Just maybe a little clarification there.
Yeah. Well, let's say, like, you know, there's been lots of raids with factories. The first Trump administration, that's where most of the raids occurred, was in factory settings. If you are like law enforcement and you were investigating a factory, of course, you'd want to see their employment roles. You'd want to see the I-9 verifications that the company put together for employees. And so it's possible, yes, like a judicial warrant could include anything and everything in the school. You know, for like, these warrants sometimes say things like anything that could have material indicating somebody's lawful status. You know, if that's everything. That's like everything a student or a student's family has ever submitted to the school. You know, and it would allow them to look for that stuff anywhere, you know, on computers, on desktops and phones, blah, blah, blah. But I've never seen a warrant like that where they go into a building where there's people that are, you know, have official roles with the institution that's owned by the building. There's people that are like, you know, they're just coming to benefit from the services. I've never seen a warrant that's that broad. but I could imagine it. But I think that's a very, very, that would be like an unprecedented kind of thing to see that. But I think it's technically possible.
All right. Well, somehow we made it through all our questions.
Excellent. Let me turn over to Russia and Dr. Khan if they have any final thoughts or questions they want to share. If not, the one thing I'll say is that, as CAIR as an organization, Hamza, we're here to help, to provide guidance. We can't solve every problem, we can't take on every case, but you can always reach out to us and ask us for help and guidance, and we can try to point you in the right direction, inshallah. And the second thing I would say is we don't want anyone panicking or worrying too much about what's going on, right? I mean, we've got to carry on with our lives. It's inshallah very unlikely that Islamic school is going to be targeted in any sort of coordinated way. You never know, things could happen. We certainly don't want people to worry or panic. Be prepared, have a plan, and then move on and carry on with your lives, inshallah. And just call us if something comes up, inshallah. But Russia, Dr. Khan, any questions or thoughts you want to share as we wrap up?
Jazakumullah khair. And I want to thank the CAIR team, especially for coming out, honoring our request to put on this webinar, and to all of our school leaders and educators who've joined us tonight. You guys are doing the right thing. You are planning. You are getting informed. And I want to reiterate what Brother Edward has just said about don't let this hold you back. Don't let this pause you in the work that you're doing, the really important work that you're doing, but let it be something that you start working on in terms of the plans. We're here at ISLA to support you. We're cultivating these relationships with other content knowledge experts or experts in the fields that you need support with. So, inshallah, we'll be sending this recording and the resources as soon as it's available. And we're here to support you. We have our monthly admin meetings where these kinds of conversations come up. So we invite you to stay engaged. And again, jazakumullah khairan to all of you.
Waiyaki. Russia, anything you want to share? All right. Well, thank you, Gadir. Thank you, Robert, for your time this evening and for doing this with different community groups who are needing this information. We really appreciate it. May Allah protect you all and grant you success. And thank you all. Reach out anytime at CAIR.com, CAIR.com. And ISLA, what's your website, ISLA? Is it isla.org?
theisla.org, theisla.org. Thank you.
Wonderful. Excellent. All right.
Thank
Thank
you.
you all. Have a great night, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.
Salam.